Good morning and welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWAG. We are so glad that you're all joining us today for an, um, a new installment of our media literacy series, Democracy in the Free Press. We are glad to have Meredith Gardner, who is MWAG's Director of Media Literacy, with us today to teach us and to share new information that is relevant to our current day. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Meredith. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can even come off mute and just ask Meredith. We love to have it questions so we can all learn together. So I'll just go ahead and turn the time over to Meredith.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Thank you, friends, for joining us. I'm sorry about the delay. We were having some issues getting the screen share to work. So thank you for your patience. I'm so excited to talk to you today about democracy in the free press. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on why I decided to talk about this today. And it's not just because of everything that's happening in current events, although there are a lot of things happening and we'll talk about some of them. We have been working really hard in MWIG on our programming over the last couple of months in thinking about what our members need and thinking about what they need, especially at a time like this when there's a lot of turmoil in our government and a lot of uncertainty. And so in our programming, we're really working on focusing over the next few months, especially on educating and reminding our members what guardrails there are in the government to keep our democracy strong. And then also what guardrails we can provide as citizens, what we can do as individuals to help strengthen our democracy. So that's this is kind of a preview of the programming you're going to see coming from us over the next couple of months. And we really hope it's helpful to you in reminding you that there are really great systems that our founders put in place to help our government remain strong, and that it's so important for us to remain true to those systems, and that can really guide us in our action and in our principles as we're doing advocacy work or as we're contacting our members of Congress. It can help us know how to stay on track and not get sidetracked by a lot of the really polarizing issues that we see today. So I hope that you find this helpful in knowing what you can do in your own personal advocacy work and just being aware of what's happening in our government right now. So democracy is super important to MWEG, obviously, and so is a free press. And it's actually one of our principles of ethical government that we believe that free press is essential to government transparency and accountability. And government officials have a duty to respect the independence of journalistic organizations. You can find all of our principles for ethical government on our website. If you just Google MWEG Principles of Ethical Government, you will see all of them. But this is the main one about free press. There's also Principles of Ethical Government about our duty as citizens to be well educated and informed. One of the reasons why our founding fathers enshrined the right to a free press in the Constitution is because they really believed that the free press could serve as a check on the other three branches of government. And that without the free press, we wouldn't really have a great way of finding out what was true and what was happening in our government and whether or not our politicians and our representatives were doing their jobs. So this is the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. We're going to talk a little bit about what that specifically means for the press, and then kind of some trends we're seeing in the government today. This is super important because Thomas Jefferson, I want to preface this with the idea that when Thomas Jefferson was writing our founding documents, the press was not like a paragon of reliability or unbiased reporting, right? This was like the time of the muckrakers, right? Of people who were purposely putting out newspaper articles that were inflammatory And even in that scenario, I love this quote from Thomas Jefferson. He says, "We're left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government. I would not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." So a free press was that important to Thomas Jefferson that he would rather go anarchy plus newspapers than government without newspapers. And I think that really speaks to the importance of the work journalists do and the work that credible media outlets do in helping our democracy to flourish. Um, I want to talk a little bit about constitutional protections for news outlets. Um, One thing that's important to remember is we have what the First Amendment says, and then we have lots of case law. So people who have brought cases to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has kind of outlined, well, what does it mean to infringe upon the free press? And there's so many cases out there that we have a really good idea of what that means and what newspapers can do and what the government is not allowed to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. One, news outlets can participate in the reasonable gathering of information in public spaces. So that means when there is a public meeting of some kind, maybe a city council meeting or a school board meeting, the government can't prevent a newspaper outlet from coming to cover that meeting. And actually, it's a really important function of newspapers because I personally don't have time to go to every school board meeting or every city council meeting or every I can't watch C-SPAN all the time. I don't have the time. None of us does. And so that's why it's so important for the newspapers to have this protection. They can also publish information that was illegally obtained as long as the journalist didn't do anything illegal. So that's like the case of whistleblowers. And I have a picture of Edward Snowden on here because he's a really well-known example of a whistleblower who, it gave information to newspapers about our national security apparatus and then was later charged for crimes for doing what he did in releasing this highly classified information to newspaper outlets. But the newspapers themselves couldn't be charged for publishing the information that he gave them because they didn't do anything illegal to obtain the information. I hope that makes sense. We had another recent example of this with Signalgate, right? With the editor of The Atlantic who is added to the Signal group chat with all the national security representatives on there. And he saw all this classified information on there, right? And he had to use judgment in whether to release that information. And he eventually released quite a bit of it. And he didn't do anything illegal to obtain that. He didn't hack into the chat, right? He was invited, and so he couldn't be charged for publishing that information. I hope that makes sense. So that's a really important protection for news outlets. And it also allows us to get a lot of really important information about our government from whistleblowers. You can think of big cases like Watergate that were really important. And so that way, when newspapers publish this information, hopefully using their best judgment, right, they know they aren't going to be retaliated against by the government. Okay. These are things the government cannot do. So the government cannot force an outlet to publish something. That would be a state-run outlet, and a lot of countries have state-run media. Russia, China, any kind of authoritarian country usually has a state-run media outlet. So it's been well established the government can't force an outlet to publish something. They might suggest, they might persuade, but they can't force. They cannot regulate or restrict outlets or reporters because of their viewpoints. We're going to talk more about this specific issue because it's been in the news quite a bit lately. But a newspaper outlet or a government outlet cannot say, I disagree with this reporter's point of view, or I disagree with this outlet's point of view. I'm going to specifically target that outlet and say they cannot cover this event because I don't like what they're saying. I don't like what they're reporting. That's actually not allowed. That's considered an infringement on the freedom of the press. They also can't require an outlet to censor or ban content. So they can't go to an outlet and say, I'm sorry, you really can't publish the Pentagon Papers. You really can't publish this information from the Signal chat. They cannot punish or prohibit a news outlet from doing that. Um, and this isn't a comprehensive view of all media law. It's obviously like much more complicated. This is just meant to be like a general overview, but I hope that makes sense of some of the things that newspapers are allowed to do and things that the government is actually restricted from doing. So now we're going to talk a little bit about current cases to watch, things that are happening in the news that are concerning from the side of freedom of the press. So one of the big ones right now is this case of the Associated Press. The Associated Press, in case you weren't aware, serves an international audience. And when the current administration decided to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, AP decided that it wasn't going to use the Gulf of America in all cases. It said it would continue to publish the name the Gulf of Mexico because internationally that's still what the body of water is referred to. Well, the Trump administration got very upset about this and actually barred AP from covering the president on Air Force One and in the Oval Office and some other events. And so AP took the White House to court, and I believe it was just earlier this week that a judge ruled that the AP could not be blocked because of its viewpoints. They haven't been reinstated yet because they're allowing for time for an appeal, and the White House has already stated its intention to appeal. So we're going to kind of keep watching to see what happens on this. But that goes back to that issue of the government not being allowed to punish people, to punish reporters or news outlets because of differing viewpoints. So AP was expressing a viewpoint that they were still going to call it the Gulf of Mexico. And because of that viewpoint, the judge ruled that the Trump administration was unconstitutionally censoring them. So that's something to continue to watch and to see how that appeal goes. As of last I checked yesterday, there wasn't really much filed for the reason for that appeal or what their argument was going to be. But I believe the appeal has like a week to go through. So I don't think it will take that long to find out more information about what's going to happen there. Another case to watch is about Voice of America. So if you're unfamiliar with Voice of America, I know I have not always been familiar with Voice of America. Voice of America is a US government funded news outlet. It's actually considered the largest international news broadcaster in the United States. And the reason that people in the United States aren't aware of it usually is because it's not intended for a domestic audience. It's intended for international audiences. And they actually employ, I want to say in the thousands, 1,600 plus reporters. And they are considered an independent, unbiased, reliable news outlet, and they focus on bringing news to areas of the world where free press is limited. And this was started during World War II to combat Nazi propaganda. And unfortunately, last month, Voice of America was dismantled along with its sister organizations, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and there was a Middle Eastern and African, just various other outlets. And I know a judge ruled that they couldn't withdraw funding. Unfortunately, the organization's still on hold. And Carrie Lake, who was going to be the head of the Voice of America she's from Arizona, was reportedly being moved to the State Department to continue dismantling the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which runs the Voice of America. So that's another one to watch. And we'll talk about what we can do as we watch these later on. U.S. aid cuts. So a lot of people weren't aware of this, but most of you know that USAID has been pretty much dismantled, but USAID was considered the largest public donor to international media development. And Reporters Without Borders reports that there was $268 million frozen from efforts to boost independent media around the world. That was funded by USAID. And so this has had a huge impact on reporters around the world. I'm trying to find my notes, but I want to say there was upwards of 3 or 4 thousand reporters who were funded. Ooh, let me go back. 3 to 4 thousand reporters who were funded. Sorry, I'm trying to get my numbering to go back. No, I don't want that. Slide. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Um, Yeah, I'm going to say there was like upwards of 4,000 reporters in over 700 non-state media outlets internationally that were being funded by USAID in an effort to combat authoritarianism and promote democracy. And I know specifically one of the hardest hit areas was Ukraine. There was a lot of reporters in independent news outlets in the Ukraine area that were reporting on the war, and those have been really struggling since this happened. Potential NPR and PBS cuts. You probably heard recently the CEOs of NPR and PBS appeared before the House Oversight Subcommittee, and there's a lot of movement toward defunding NPR and PBS. Now, NPR and PBS do not receive government funding isn't the majority of their budget. Federal funding is the majority of their budget. However, defunding them would have a huge impact on the work they do. And a lot of people don't recognize that people who live in rural areas, especially, rely on public media to give them their news and information. And it's a lot of people say, well, the government should just get out of funding news altogether. However, it's really important to think about the benefits of having news organizations that are nonprofit and how that motivates them to do work that commercial outlets won't do. If you've ever watched something on PBS Frontline or any of the documentaries or podcast series that NPR does, you will recognize that these are things that maybe commercial outlets won't touch, that NPR and PBS are able to cover because they don't have those commercial ties and interests. So I'm a big proponent of NPR and PBS, and it's definitely concerning that there's talk about cutting them. Um, we've also had some cases of obeying in advance, what we would call obeying in advance, which is kind of like showing deference to the current administration. From the Washington Post and the LA Times, they made decisions not to endorse a candidate, and got a lot of criticism for that. The Washington Post has also made some pretty big changes to its editorial opinion pages, and has lost its opinion editor and several columnists for that. There's also an ABC News libel suit settlement that happened, that people were concerned. ABC News was trying to gain favor with the Trump administration, and that it showed some weakness in settling a libel suit with Trump. And then this big one that's happening right now is a CBS 60 Minutes lawsuit. So there was a suit that was filed by Trump against 60 Minutes for the way that they edited their interview with Kamala Harris. And unfortunately, CBS and Paramount Paramount is going through a merger, and there's some concerns that if CBS doesn't settle this lawsuit with the Trump administration, that the Trump administration will block their merger from going through. So there's some really like unsettling behavior happening from media companies and showing deference to the president to protect their business interests, and it's something to keep an eye on for sure. Okay, so I just told you a lot of really concerning things that are happening, and I want to tell you that there are things that you can do. So please, even as you see the news about media coverage and potential infringements on the free press, please try not to get discouraged because our free press is still strong, and we're going to continue to watch and see if there's any other sliding that is concerning. But things you can do right now is write to your members of Congress. So I just wrote a letter to my senators and my representative. I live in Texas about Voice of America specifically and the national security implications of Voice of America closing. So if you're concerned about any of the issues we've talked about, the Associated Press, NPR, PBS, if you're big fans of PBS programming, educational programming for kids, if you like listening to NPR in your car, please write to your member of Congress about that and let them know that's on your radar and that that's something you're worried about. I'd also just really encourage you to support quality journalism whenever you can. Viewership matters to them, even if it's just online or on social media. Do what you can to make time during the day, as much as is mentally healthy for you, to be in quality journalism outlets. Um, Stay informed about your local community. Um, a lot of people have way more trust in their local news outlets than they do national news outlets, and that's understandable. But local community is always where you can make the most impact. And so please make an effort to stay informed about your local area and understand ways you can have an impact in your area and support your local outlets whenever you can. There's been huge losses in the number of local outlets around the United States over the last 10 years. And the more people take the time to tune into those local outlets, the stronger they're going to be. And the stronger your communities will be as you know what's happening. And then finally, educate others on the importance of media literacy to peacemaking. So this picture on here is a screenshot of a slideshow we actually have available on our website. It's called Peacemaking Through Media Literacy, and it's available to anyone. You could use it with friends. You could use it for a Relief Society activity. And it's just a very basic slide reel on how media literacy skills are peacemaking skills, because we can't be peacemakers and we can't advocate for ethical government and promote a more just and ethical world if we don't understand what's happening in the world and if we don't know the truth of what's happening. So media literacy is super important. And a lot of people have really cynical feelings and thoughts about finding truth and about the news media right now. And I can assure you that journalists are working really hard, and a lot of journalists do really good work. There's no perfect outlet, there's no perfect reporter, but they do really good work as long as we're willing to take the time to read it and to pay attention. Okay, I think I have one more slide if I can make it work. Okay, yes. Final thoughts. Like I said, remember, no journalist or news organization is perfect. They make mistakes. I have plenty of complaints about various news outlets, big and small, but overall, I know that the work they do is really important. And that's why the founders thought freedom of the press was going to be so important to democracy. Journalists prevent corruption and ensure government accountability. If they weren't diving into public meetings, if they weren't doing good analysis of government communications and data, that we wouldn't be aware of a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse that is happening in our government. Journalists are key in rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. And reporters really consider their work a public service. I will tell you, as a former newspaper reporter, it is a work you have to love to do well, and to be committed to, because it doesn't pay well. I will just say that I've never in my adult life been paid less than I was when I was a full-time newspaper reporter. So, but reporters love their work and they love their country generally speaking. And that's why they do what they do. So please keep that in mind as you consume media and as you keep a watch on these stories that are involving restrictions on the free press. I just want to give you I want to assure you that you can make a difference in this, that these small actions of supporting outlets and writing to your members of Congress, even if it seems like they're never listening, it really does, it really can make a difference, especially as we all work together to do these small things together. Um, and so please remember that. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
I don't see any questions. I just wanted to let you know that I put a bunch of links in the chat, so I will wait and let you guys grab some of those links. They are to some of the media literacy presentation materials that MWAC has provided for members, and those are, you don't have to be a member of MWAC to access those, but if you, those are just the quick links from our website. Also to the principles of ethical government about free press and media literacy. There's links in the chat about those as well. Any other thoughts? I don't see any other ones. I do want to thank you all for being with us on the Grow today. This will be available recorded in MWAG Central and also on MWAG's YouTube channel, so you can access it and share it if you so wish to do. I want to invite you guys to come and join us next week. We're going to talk about the quilt project that you have seen us talking about in MWAG Central and on our social media. We're going to invite some women who have hosted or are planning to host a quilting in their community, in their states. The last I saw, we had 12 states represented. And so any quilts that are made at those activities will be given to their state representatives. Yes, freedom of the press, Cindy, definitely that's a good one to put on your quilt square and ask your members of Congress to protect freedom of the press and to protect democracy. So any thoughts that you want to put on your quilt square, either thanking them if they're positive or just asking them to be active, that'd be great. But we'll talk more about that next week on the Grow. If there's no other questions, then we'll say goodbye for today. Thanks.